Broadcasting from the heart of the Colorado Rockies, it's 4th&99 with your hosts, David Slade, Keith Brookman, and Matt Staffiero. Now let's talk football here on 4th&99.
Hey, good evening, sports fans, and welcome back to another amazing show here at 4th&99. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am David, your host, and we're going to talk Denver Broncos and a little bit of NFL sprinkled in. And tonight, as always, I have with me Matt Staffiero and Keith Brugman. And tonight, we have a special guest. We have James Merrilatt from 104.3 The Fan here in Denver, Colorado. James, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us this evening.
You bet. Thanks for having me, fellas. I appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
So, all right, hey, how you guys doing? Everybody survived Thanksgiving weekend and everything?
Barely.
Barely?
Oh, yeah. No, the cold's been making its way through the house. Thankfully, we're all okay. That's all you can ask for.
Yeah, definitely. It's like getting to be that time of year where the kids go back to school and they bring all the germs home. The plague rats come out and everything. So start just spreading germs everywhere. So, Keith, how are things up in Montana?
You know, it was a fantastic, beautiful day. We got through Thanksgiving. It was really nice, but today was like 68 degrees, 69 degrees. It's like, man, I think we were warmer than Atlanta, if I heard correctly. So, you know, we're doing all right up here. We're enjoying it.
Yeah, I think it was close to 70 here today.
A little sunbathing.
Yeah, we might have to let James in on, we're placing bets on when we think the first snow is going to happen. Yeah. You want to get in on it, James?
Yeah.
Man, well, we've already set the record, right? So,
yeah.
Right.
My son says it's not going to happen until Christmas Eve. So I'm going to go with him. That would be a long time. I mean, that's 3 more weeks, which, we're officially into winter by then. But no reason for me to go, when it comes to Sundays and we're picking games, he does a lot better than I do. So I'll go with him on the snow forecast, too.
Well, and I hope he's right because I'm going to the Bengals game on the 19th. And last time I went to the Bengals game, me and my wife went as a Monday night game, and it was freezing. I mean, it was probably in the teens. And it was just cold out there. So, yeah, it wasn't enjoyable at all. We left probably in the third quarter, I think. Said, man, it's too cold to sit out here. Let's go home and finish watching this thing. So, hopefully warm weather continues.
Was that the Super Bowl year, the DeMarcus Ware fumble recovery and overtime year? Or was that
no, this was 3 years ago, maybe, I think.
Okay. All right.
I can't even remember if we won that game or not. So I think we actually won in overtime.
Left for the third quarter.
Well, we went home and watched.
Were they leading at the third quarter?
They were leading when we left, and I think they actually ended up winning it in overtime. So, but hey, if this weather can stay like this, I don't mind it at all, especially if I'm going to a game. And then I got tickets to the Chiefs game on January 9th. Hopefully that's a meaningful game,
Yes.
Really hope it is. So. James, one thing you mentioned to me when you sent over your bios, you said you're a 40-year season ticket holder?
Yep.
I mean,
now, my family's been a season ticket holder a long time.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask, because I was going to say you definitely don't look old enough to have held season tickets for 40 years. So
no, I didn't pay for them the entire 40 years. I've been going every Sunday since I was 8. That's when I finally got my own seat. But my family's been going. They've had tickets since back in the 60s. They tell stories of going back when it was old Bears Stadium before they did the expansion, before they built the East Stands at Old Mile High. So it is a long-time Merrilatt family tradition for sure.
Okay. All right. So you've gone to lots of games. What's either your first or your favorite Bronco memory?
From being there?
Just being there or just in general?
Well, I mean, my favorite of all time is Super Bowl 32, John Mobley knocking down the pass. And, I vaguely remember Super Bowl 12, but my family obviously was scarred by that. And then I had Super Bowl 21, 22, 24, which was awful. And so, you go back to Super Bowl 32, it's like, God, are they going to go 0-5? And Favre leads them right down the field, and they score on the first drive, and you're thinking, here we go again. And then the way the game turns out, Broncos are leading in the fourth quarter, and when Mobley knocked down that pass, I was with my entire family, but I remember looking at my brother and looking at my dad, and we didn't know what to do, right? Like, we were used to going outside and, throwing pop cans or whatever, but we weren't used to that. How do you celebrate this? Like, do you hug, do you high five?
Right.
What do you do? So that was probably, I mean, that was number one, just to finally win a championship, to go down to the parade. That was pretty incredible. But yeah, I mean, I've been fortunate to be in the building for a lot of really cool moments. Tebow to Demarius was an amazing one.
Oh, wow.
A lot of Manning moments were great. I was there for the drive to the drive to against the Oilers. I was there for the fumble for Ernest Biner. I was in the north stand, so it was on the far end. It was on the south end of the stadium. We weren't quite sure what happened until we saw Mecklenburg pointing. So yeah, I mean, it's just been fortunate. I've been fortunate to have a chance to be there. I mean, that's my family. We build our fall and our winter around the Broncos schedule. That's, how we plan holidays. That's how, when I was a kid, we planned vacations. So, I've been fortunate to be able to be in the building for a lot of them. And, it's a fun franchise to be a fan of, because there are, we could talk to the entire show of great Broncos memories, because they've had plenty of them in the last 40 years.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
And really quick, I'll throw out my first memory of the Denver Broncos, and then I'll turn it over to Keith and Matt, let them ask some questions. And this sort of reflects on how old I am. First game I ever went to in Mile High Stadium, Floyd Little's last home game there against the Philadelphia Eagles. So, and talk about a great game, watching him take a screen pass 67 yards for a touchdown to win the game. So that was awesome. And I'm old enough to clearly remember Super Bowl 12. And yes, it was traumatizing. so all right,
David, I've heard that story from both my grandfathers about Floyd Little's final game so many times. I feel like I was there. So we'll have that connection.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right, Keith, you got anything for James?
Yeah, I'd just like to rewind just a little bit. If I did my research correct, you're a graduate of CU in '96, and I was just wondering, did the success of the CU Buffalo team have any influence on your collegiate or your post-collegiate career, or were you already predestined?
No, I mean, I think I was already heading down this path. They got really good 88, 89. I guess 89 was the Sal Onessi, Darian Hagan took over for him year. They went undefeated and lost in the Orange Bowl. So prior to that, I wasn't much of a CU fan, because they just weren't very good in the old powder blue uniforms. I mean, we were always a Broncos family. And then the Nuggets, growing up here, I was a huge Nuggets fan. We didn't have the Abs. We didn't have the Rockies when I was growing up. So it was just those two sports. But, man, I was the guy that, we were doing fake sports talk shows when I was a kid with my buddies. It's just always kind of been the thing that I was into. I was always the sports nerd, as I like to call myself, from the get-go.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Those CU teams were fun, though. So when I was there, I actually went to SMU my first 2 years and then transferred to CU and finished there. So I'm walking around campus, and there's Cordell Stewart, there's Michael Westbrook, there's Vance Joseph in my operations management class, and he was there every day that I was there, so that was impressive. So yeah, that was the end of the heyday. I actually think the '94 team was the best CU team of all time, but they didn't win a national championship. They finished 11-1, but man, those are some good teams. I would love for it to get back to that at some point. College football, when you can go up there in a packed house and the game means something, it's pretty hard to beat that.
100%.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm going to switch directions a little bit. So pulling some stuff from the bio that we got from you, what was it like creating and operating Mile High Sports? Like, what did that journey look like?
It was, I think it's one of those things, if I knew then what I know now, and, when you get to be older, you have kind of lead feet. So I'm not sure I would have jumped into it, but it was a ton of fun. I mean, I was just it was in my late 20s. Only thing I knew about magazines was I was a Sports Illustrated subscriber. That was it. That was my total background in the magazine industry. And, I loved going to the mailbox every Wednesday when SI would arrive. And if it was John Elway on the cover or Larry Walker or whatever, it was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. So we decided, well, why don't we just do that every month, right? Instead of every week. And Sports Illustrated will do it every month. And every time you get one, it's a guy from your favorite teams. And that was kind of the genesis of Mile High Sports. So we started it in 2002. And you just kind of figure it out as you go along. And you ask questions that people in the industry probably thought were really, really dumb, but we didn't know the answers to them. So Dan Brogan, who owns 5280, was a huge help to us. A bunch of idiot kids wanting to start a sports magazine coming in and bugging him, and he gave us a ton of his time. And then it just kind of evolved. In 2007, we were able to get into the radio side of the business. And at that point, my background in radio was I had been on Irvin Joe's show one time as a caller. That was it. But listened to sports talk my entire life and kind of learned that business as we went, and then did the website in 2012. I mean, it all just kind of, one thing led to another. You just kind of, I guess, keep showing up every day and trying to figure out that day's challenge. But man, it was, I've been lucky enough to be doing this for 20 years and convincing people that going to games and watching games is part of my job. So I'm not going to complain at all.
Yeah, I might need you to record that so I could tell my wife that next week.
Trust me.
So Jay, and you just mentioned Irvin Joe. I mean, and you probably listen to like Theory Smith and the greats back in the 80s and 90s growing up in Denver. You work at 104.3 now, which is probably the premier sports channel in the Denver market. So you work with some big time guys and, differing opinions. How do you guys balance that difference of opinions? I know a lot of it seems you guys have the banter back and forth on the shows and things like that. But I'm sure at times there's probably times where people really do get a little frustrated with each other, and I mean, how do you guys balance that out?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly you do get to the point where it's like by the time you get to commercial break, you're ready to chuck the headset and go for a walk. It doesn't happen very often, and it's happened less at the Fan than when I was at Mile High Sports. We had some knockdown dragouts there where I would have to go get guys out of the parking garage because they wouldn't want to come back in and finish the show and try and talk them off the ledge, so to speak. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think we all have a pretty healthy understanding of the fact that, look, we're talking about sports, right? And you might like Teddy Bridgewater, and I may think he's a journeyman, but at the end of the day, one, we're going to find out who's right? That's the beauty of it. They're going to play the games, and we're going to see the conclusion. And the other part of it is, we're not negotiating peace in the Middle East, right? It's football, it's basketball, it's baseball, it's whatever we happen to be arguing about. And I think everybody, for the most part, almost everybody I've worked with in my career, and certainly everybody at the Fan, gets that and kind of gets the big picture. I will say this, though, it's never scripted. It's never hey, you take this side, I'll take that side. It's all organic, and the conversations just tend to happen. It really is no different than, the four of us sitting around a bar before a Rockies game and we start debating something and, the conversation just evolves. That's kind of how it is, and that's when I think sports talk is at its best. So usually we keep our cool.
Yeah, and Matt is definitely he's the lock flogger here on Rocky Mountain Sports Network. And him and I have had some. If we were in the same room, there probably would have been some knockdown dragouts. So
some fisticuffs.
It definitely is all in fun. Like you said, it's just sports, and we're going to find out in the end who's right and who's wrong. And unfortunately, I think Matt's coming out on top here. I don't think Teddy's the answer either, but I don't think Locke has a future here either. So
I come from an Italian family. Arguing is part of the background. Right? That's how holidays are. That's how it's supposed to be. If somebody's not mad, we're not doing it right.
Exactly.
Well, I want to bring it a little bit more forward. If I count correctly, 5 former Broncos that work at 104.3 The Fan. And my question is, what kind of insider opinions do those players have about our current Broncos team? What can you share with us?
Wow. What was really interesting was during training camp, the Teddy versus Drew discussion, the former players were all Teddy to a person. Maybe Nate Jackson, not as much as the rest of them, but everybody else that was a former player was on that side. The analysts, so to speak, the non-players, the analyst sounds better than the non-athletes. The non-athletes were mostly Drew, maybe a couple of Teddies here and there. And I really think what that is, it's the perspective of the players tend to come at it from, hey, we got to win Sunday. It's a very short-term mentality because they played in a league where what's the average career? 3 years maybe, depending on the position. So it was all about, hey, we got to win Sunday. We got to win now. Who gives us, and I hate this phrase, but you hear it over and over and over again, who gives us the best chance to win? And that's why they were all Teddy. I think people like me, D-Mac, some people that were more on the Drew side, not to speak for him, but just my position on it was, hey, you got to look at it long term. You got to look at it maybe more as a GM versus as a player and a head coach. And how do you build something, and what's the long-term goal, and best chance to win what was always kind of my position on it. But I think it provides a fascinating kind of viewpoint is how they look at it. And the other part of it is just sitting in there and talking X's and O's with those guys. I had the opportunity to coach my son's junior high football team this year, and just being able to talk football at all with those guys and the insight they can give you and the little things to look for. I mean, I've been watching this game for 40 years, not just Broncos games, but, I'm probably like you guys. Anything that's on, anytime it's a football game, I've got the TV on it, and you've heard every analyst and watched every show, and you think you really know the game, and then you sit down with guys who, did it for a living, and it's just tremendous. The things they see, the way they can read the game. It's a little bit like you see it kind of when you watch Tony Romo do a game where he calls the plays and things like that. He's sort of the first analyst that kind of, just goes ahead and wings it and does it live on the air. That's a little bit how those guys are when they're talking about anything football related. It's pretty fascinating. It's like getting it's like sitting in there with the professors, and you're just trying to make sure you can keep up. It's a different viewpoint on the game for sure.
That's fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, and you mentioned sort of controversial topics and things like that. And you came out with the take last week that, has sort of a lot of Bronco country stirred up, and you've come out and said the Broncos are
maybe
have labeled Jerry Jeudy a bust. I mean, or something along those lines. And you came out with an article and said, is Jerry Jeudy a bust? I mean, and looking at his stats here, I mean, over a 16-game season, the only thing I see here that is really, eye-catching is 3 touchdowns. I mean, other than that, for 16 games, over 1,100 yards, I mean, that's pretty good. He's doing a lot better at catching the ball this year. Yeah, he's been out, hasn't played a lot this year. But, I mean, do you really think that the Broncos are at a point where they're ready to move away from Jerry Jeudy?
I don't think they're ready to move away from him, and it's largely based on the last bullet point on that slide you showed, that he's still on a rookie contract, and relatively speaking, he's an inexpensive piece. But when you draft a guy 15th overall, when he's the highest drafted wide receiver in the history of the franchise, you're expecting him to be the number one guy. You're expecting him to be a guy, 5 years after he retires. You're talking, man, where are we putting him on the facade here at Empower Field, or whatever they're calling it by that point? Do we wedge him in between Elam and Shanahan, or do we, where are we putting him? Like, that's the kind of career he should have. And when you look at the contracts they gave Cortland Sutton primarily, and even Tim Patrick, it's like, all right, well, that's a lot of money to pay your number 2 and your number 3. So if Jerry Jeudy's truly a number 1, then you paid your 2 and your 3 a lot of money. Or is Jerry Jeudy not a number 1, and they paid those guys the right amount of money? Like, to me, it can't be both. It can't be Judy's a 1 and they paid him appropriately, because that doesn't seem quite the best way to manage the financial side of things in a cap-based sport. So, look, I think he's going to be a very good player. I like Jerry Jeudy. I just think Jerry Jeudy gets a little bit more of a free pass than, say, Drew Lock, right? Jerry Judy's played 21 games as a pro. He's got 3 touchdowns and been over 100 yards twice, one of which was in a blowout down in Atlanta last year when he just caught a bunch of garbage yards. So, Drew Lock's played 18 games, gone 8-10, had some highs, had some lows, and everybody wants to run him out of town. Jerry Jeudy would just keep giving chance after chance after chance. And when I wrote that article, a lot of what people came back to me with was, well, look who his quarterbacks have been. I mean, he's had Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock and Jeff Driscoll and Brett Rippon and Kendall Hinton for a game. My rebuttal to that is those same quarterbacks helped Tim Patrick get an extension. So, again, you can't have it both ways with some of these guys. I think Jerry Jeudy's going to be a really good player. I just wonder if the Broncos believe that, because if they did, I don't know that they would have invested that kind of money in both Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick.
Okay. Yeah. So just kind of switching gears, talking about the contract. I mean, for both wide receivers, it's roughly 26 mil averaged out a year is kind of what's being rumored or what's been said. That's significantly less than what you would think for two top tier wide receivers. The average is less than DeAndre Hopkins in a single year. So I mean, I could still see a way where they could work it in, but it's just trying to understand what's the dynamic of a first year, a number one receiver. What's he going to be worth in this type of package? Because it's going to be split across. There's a ton of three wides in a Pat Shurmur offense. Is Jerry Jeudy's number one going to be that 28 million, expected at that point, or is it going to be significantly less because of the Cortland Suttons and the Tim Patricks?
Well, I think that's a good question. And that's sort of where, if you look forward, that's where I'm coming from of, all right, if he's truly a number one and you're going to pay him like a star, which if you drafted 15th, you need to be a star. Now, if you put a DeAndre Hopkins type number in there, and add it with Sutton and add it with Patrick. Now the top three guys are what, $50 million? I mean, that's a lot of money. The cap is going to go up, and it's going to probably go up significantly. So, and it's a team that's been under the cap, for the last 5 years, and they keep having rollover, and they've got some financial flexibility. So I don't think it paints them in a corner. It's just if you try and imagine a year or two down the road when it comes time to make a decision on Jerry Jeudy, well, that's a lot of money to have tied up in three receivers. So does one of them move? Does something happen? The NFL contracts are, about worth what the paper that they're printed on. But it is just an interesting dynamic of, okay, you already got two guys you invested in. What happens with Jeudy? And then the secondary part of that is what happens with KJ Hamler, right? Like you drafted him in the second round. He was supposed to be a part of this team for a long time. Those were supposed to be your two cornerstone guys. Maybe with Sutton as your third guy, and all of a sudden you're like, well, geez, how does he fit in? It's a good problem to have, I guess. It's an embarrassment of riches at a skill position, but it just does make me think, for a long time we kept hearing, oh, they didn't hit the cap because they got to save money for DT. You always knew DT was getting a big contract. Are we saying that about Jerry Jeudy?
Unfortunately,
I don't know that we are at this point. It's
not
early,
at this point.
But I don't know that we are yet.
So I guess what we were talking about last week a little bit was, do these contracts essentially make KJ Hamler or Jerry Jeudy expendable? And I said it may very well. We talk about different reasons. We talk about the pursuit of the quarterback. What's something that's going to that the Denver Broncos have that's flashy to offer? Well, it could be one of those premier, high drafted wide receivers that's going to carry some high value and a low contract value, in a trade. It may take place of a first or a second round pick that you're having to give up towards an Aaron Rodgers, towards Deshaun Watson's been kind of fading out lately. Russell Wilson's been getting thrown around, or even possibly moving up to get, another guy that we will talk about a little bit more later in Matt Corral. But do you think that it makes one of them expendable at this point with those contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives them flexibility from that standpoint, right? To buy time. Both those guys, Hamler, into the Sutton and Patrick contracts by then, so they can figure out, do we restructure? Do we do? I mean, they got all sorts of options of what to do. But yeah, you can play four receivers, but can you really play four receivers? There's one football, right? So can you keep four of them happy? Can you maximize their abilities? Can you put them to the best possible use? Probably not. So at some point, yeah, you got to look at it and say, all right, who can we move? Who's an asset that we can parlay into an additional pick or put into a trade for a quarterback or to move up to draft a quarterback or whatever it turns out to be. So yeah, I think, I think Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler, based on where they were drafted and their age and their contract status, become interesting assets. And I think by giving Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick pretty nice contracts, the Broncos have established, hey, these are pretty nice assets. So it does give them plenty of chips at the table.
Yeah. I don't know if I have one more question for you about the Jerry Jeudy contract, and I'll let one of these guys take the next one. Because Buwana Beast just popped up in there. He talks about the 5th-year option. These contracts, do they buy more time for Jerry Jeudy to develop into that number one guy with that 5th-year option? I mean, we essentially get him for 3 more seasons. We look at Tim Patrick's contract. It is a 3-year season. So does this give Jerry Jeudy adequate time to find, because we have all these questions surrounding the quarterback, which you said gets tossed to you a lot. With that, that 5th-year option, it buys you that 3rd year to build a rhythm with whoever the quarterback is. Hopefully it's a decent quarterback for the future when we're talking about this in 3 years. But I guess the basis question, does it just buy more time?
Yeah, I mean, it essentially buys them all the way through next year to kind of figure out, hey, that's 3 years in. What do we have here? What do we want to do with that fifth-year option? It does. It buys them time. I think, though, if you knew Jerry Jeudy was a star, and then you could say, all right, well, who's the guy we want to have on the opposite side of him? Is it Cortland or is it Tim? And then KJ's kind of the speed guy. And then we can fill in the fourth and fifth guy with draft picks and a Kendall Hinton or a Trinity Benson or whoever it turns out to be. I just believe if you knew he was going to be a star, you would pick one of the other two to be on the other side and move forward and use that money at a different position, right? You go attract a big-time defensive lineman as a free agent or whatever you think this team needs to spend money on. Quarterbacks certainly at the top of the list, but there are other things that they still need to upgrade. So that's the only thing that I think is surprising about it. And I guess if I'm George Payton, and I'm running the team, and I know Jerry Jeudy's my one, I'm picking one of the other two guys to be my two, and then I'm moving on and figuring out how else to build the team.
Sounds solid, man. I have one question. I think you actually have a friend that we have a friend with. Kenny over at K&K Sports actually had a question. He said, "Does with Sutton and Patrick and their extensions, will that allow Denver to pursue a Denver quarterback? Is that their intention? And especially with, a mid-year signing like we saw, not waiting to the end of the year, kind of entices them early."
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I guess maybe I'm just being optimistic and maybe it's wishful thinking, but you look at it and you say, hey, they're trying to set themselves up to be an attractive destination for a quarterback. If you go back to 2012, the Broncos are coming off the 8-8 year with Tebow, which really, that team could have been 4-12 for the second straight season, right? Like, I loved that year. It was a ton of fun. Tim Tebow, I put him in my top 60 Broncos of all time and took a lot of grief for it. But just for that year and some of those miracle wins, I think he deserved it. You can't write Broncos history without Tim Tebow. But let's face it, that team should have been 4-12. And how attractive are they to Peyton Manning? Well, the fact that they had Demaryius Thomas and Eric Decker and No Sean, like there was some good young offensive talent on that team. I think they're kind of set up the same way, right? Like if you're Aaron Rodgers and you're looking at it and saying, all right, well, look at that offensive line. They just gave Garrett Bowles big money. Dalton Reisner was a premium pick. Cushenberry's a premium pick. We'll see what they do at right guard with Glasgow, but he gave him a ton of money. Right tackle still when they got a result. But then, man, a lot of skill guys. First-round pick at tight end, a really promising young back at a second-round pick. So there's a lot there that shapes up a lot like 2012 to me of, hey, how do you sell them on it? Mm-hmm. Part of that was, all the young talent. And then part of it was John Fox saying, hey, man, run whatever offense you want. I'm going to worry about the defense. Sounds a little bit like the head coach right now.
Maybe.
All right. Really quick, we're going to take an opportunity to thank today's sponsor, Willow Seasonings and Blends. They're a big supporter of Rocky Mountain Sports Network, so check out their website at willowseasonings.com. Check out some of their blends. They got the Feisty Line Fajita seasoning, and they got the Sweet Heat. So give them a try. All right.
Is this like a late night talk show where as a guest I get something from the sponsor? Is that how this works?
You definitely will. I mean, I'm the owner of the company, so if you want some, James, you send me your address and I'll send you some seasoning.
Excellent. Send me the fajita seasoning. That sounds good.
It's delicious.
Let's move on to our quarterback situation that we have here. Drew Lock. I mean, and you mentioned it earlier. There were two sides. There's Teddy's side. There's the Drew side. And you still see it. It's ripped his Bronco community in half. I mean, you see it on social media and everything. I mean, people are brutal towards each other over who should be the quarterback. I mean, Drew Lock's had two opportunities this year. And I know you had this conversation yesterday with Zach at 104.3. Drew has sort of failed in both of those opportunities. Do you think that Drew, and I'm not talking from a talent perspective, but mentally, do you think Drew is not even the best backup on this team?
Well, it depends on what you're looking for out of a backup, right? If you want somebody who can come in like we saw this past weekend where, Teddy's going to miss a couple of series, but he's going to come back in the second half. And all you want is somebody to come out and just not screw it up, right? You don't need to make any plays. You don't need to do anything flashy. Just, grab the wheel at 10-2, keep it between the lines, and get it home in the garage. Maybe not. Maybe he's not your guy. Maybe that's Brett Rippon. But if Teddy gets hurt on Sunday night, heaven forbid, and you got to play the last 6 games of the year with a backup quarterback, I'd rather have Drew Lock than Brett Rippon. I mean, that to me is a really simple equation. So if part of it is depending on how you define a backup quarterback, I think, and we talked about this when I was on with Zach yesterday, people look at, his numbers against the Ravens when he played weren't particularly good. He threw an interception at the end of the game when it didn't really matter in the end zone, but his numbers were better than Teddy Bridgewater in that game. Teddy Bridgewater, I think, was 7 for 16 or something like that. He was below 50%. So it's like, so you're playing the same opponent, using the same game plan. Your numbers were pretty much equitable, but you played terrible and the starter played well. Like, they didn't do squat in that game with Teddy either. And I think this past Sunday, the interception was inexcusable. That's the reason Drew Lock isn't playing. I mean, that moment right there, if you'd been stuck on a deserted island and came back and said, why isn't that guy your quarterback? Show him one play, and that's it. That's all you'd have to show him.
So
you can't make that play.
Do you think that's why Teddy was sort of rushed back into the game? Because when he came out there, I mean, the guy was limping around. I mean, it looked like he didn't even belong in the game at that point.
Yeah. And look, I give him a ton of credit for coming out and playing. I mean, he was tough as nails in the Thursday night game against the Browns. That was impressive to go out and play. I mean, on Tuesday at the press conference, he couldn't get off a podium that was that tall. And on Thursday, he's playing in an NFL game with Myles Garrett chasing after him. I mean, talk about toughness. That's impressive. I think we saw more of it again on Sunday playing in the second half. But I do think we have to be realistic. I mean, he was, 11-19 for $1 and change? I mean, it's not as though he's going out there and he's putting up Aaron Rodgers type numbers. Do I think this team could be 6-5 right now with Drew Lock? Yeah, I do. Now, it might not have been the exact same games. Maybe they don't win this past weekend. But I think they probably beat Cleveland because I'm guessing they could have put more than 10 points on the board. And, I think that Drew Lock gets a bad rap in this town. It's 21 games. You showed the numbers earlier for Jerry Jeudy. 21 games. And we're all, we got to wait and see. Drew Lock's played 18, and we're ready to throw him out. So I just think that's premature. I think we've seen moments and flashes where you're like, man, that dude can play. The comeback last year against the Chargers at home, there aren't a lot of quarterbacks in the league that can pull that off. I tend to, when it comes to quarterbacks, look for the big upside because I think to be a perennial contender, you have to have one of those kind of guys. You can win here and there with an Alex Smith type, a Teddy Bridgewater type, win 10 games, sneak into the playoffs, maybe win a game. But if you're going to be every single year in contention, you need a big-time guy. And almost all the time, a big-time guy also has big-time talent. And that's what Drew Lock has. People don't like to hear it, but the guy's got all the talent in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And with me being Dean the Lock Flagger, I could go on and on about how I don't believe, I seen the physical talent. I see that. But at the same time, we see that it was raw. We talk about the history. He's had 3 different offensive coordinators. We've talked about the lack of development we've seen. Granted, there's a lot of outside factors in there, but at some point we got to hold a player accountable, and especially at the most important position. We talk about the 21 games for Jerry Jeudy. It's a wide receiver. Like you said, wide receivers they come all over the place. You lose a top one, you're drafted another one. It's a very prominent position. It's not necessarily easy to replace. You're not going to find DeAndre Hopkins in every draft, but you sure as heck got a lot more darts to throw at that position. So maybe I think it's, we look at 21 games, but in the 21 games did we see the growth? Did we see the major growth in development? Sure, he shows flashes, but we could never see anything consistent. That's my biggest thing with him. It's just the consistency factor. That's why I have the hardest issue. Like at the beginning of the season, I was frustrated because, as much as I'm not a huge fan of the Teddy Bridgewater signing. I wasn't back then. I was pounding the table for Mac Jones. I was pounding the table for Justin Fields. Heck, even then I was like, let's get Aaron Rodgers. Anything's better than what we got. But, I was pounding the table for Drew Lock to start the season. I wanted to see what it is because, we talk about the narrative. It would have been a lot easier to go from Drew Lock to Teddy Bridgewater than it would be to go from Teddy Bridgewater to Drew Lock. We didn't really get a chance to see the development. We didn't get a chance to see that full offseason. I mean, we've seen a couple brief series in the Seahawks game, but we've seen a lot of what was rolled out the previous year. Not a lot of help, not a lot of the play action where Drew Lock is super efficient. That's one of his best, things that he's got lately. Not those two tight end sets. We talk about the play action, the non-establishing. So is it more of just Drew Lock is on the wrong team? If Drew Lock would have went somewhere else, would we be talking about a different Drew Lock?
Yeah, depending on where he went, right? He could have gone somewhere where it could have been worse. I mean, so much of the NFL is fit, and so much of it is the situation. I do think he's been a victim of circumstance. He's been a victim of playing for a head coach that's getting his first opportunity in his early 60s, and he has no patience for developing a young quarterback. None. He doesn't want to do that. Now, he doesn't understand that he's 8-10 with Drew Lock and he's 8-11 with Joe Flacco and Teddy Bridgewater. Basically, it's the same thing, whether he's gone with a veteran or a young guy. But I think that's part of it. I think it's interesting to me that you'll hear people who just rip Pat Shurmur. Oh, Pat Shurmur's a terrible offensive coordinator. But then they're upset with Drew Lock because he didn't develop under Pat Shurmur. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And I guess I'm just waiting for the list to come over on my email of all the young quarterbacks Pat Shurmur has developed. I just keep getting these blank emails with no names on them.
You're not going to throw Daniel Jones on there?
Yeah,
right.
No, we'll leave him far away.
I think that's part of the issue. I mean, it's all the grand hypothetical, but if Drew Lock was playing for Kyle Shanahan, do I think he would have some success? Yeah, I do. I think had Gary Kubiak taken the OC job when they hired Vic Fangio, I think Drew Lock would have had a lot of success. I think he gets a bad rap where, and this is the Broncos way. They did the same thing with Paxton Lynch. As soon as the young guy doesn't develop, let's drop rumors and let's plant seeds out there that he doesn't work hard and that he's too busy with the Xbox and all that stuff. They love to chuck people under the bus on the way out the door. Fact of the matter is the common denominator in the inability to develop a quarterback is the Broncos. It's the organization. So either they draft the wrong guys, which they drafted both those guys, or they don't develop them. I think Paxton Lynch would have been a bust no matter what. But did they help him when they bring him in from Memphis, where he ran 8 plays and force square peg in the round hole and make him run Gary Kubiak's offense? No, of course not. Like, you look at what they did in Buffalo. It's you bring in Josh Allen from Wyoming. He can run the ball. He's almost like having a fullback back there. I mean, in his first and second year, he looked more like Tebow than he does the guy now, right? And they did things for him that he was good at, let him have some success, and you build a foundation and build upon it. They didn't do that with Paxton Lynch. They didn't do that with Drew Lock. And, maybe they look at it and say, hey, these guys aren't worth it. But, again, when I complain that they take Bradley Chubb instead of Josh Allen, people will say, well, Josh Allen wouldn't have developed here because they don't know how to develop quarterbacks. And then in the next tweet, they're throwing Drew Lock under the bus. It's like, well, both can't be at fault here. I mean, I guess partially they can be, but like, it's
a double-edged blade.
Pick a lane.
Yeah.
Pick a lane. Yeah. So, and here's the other thing. I think if I had to ask you guys, both quarterbacks leave. Teddy Bridgewater leaves. Drew Lock leaves. Which one has more potential of having you in 2 or 3 years going, dang, we had that guy here? It's clearly Drew Lock. It ain't Teddy Bridgewater, which is all the more reason why he should be playing instead of Teddy.
Yeah. This transitions pretty well. Back in August, you wrote an article for 104.3 The Fan, and you said, quote unquote, are the Broncos a good organization or a bad one? The QB decision will help answer that question. With the decision being Teddy Bridgewater, do you think you are willing to stand here and label the Denver Broncos as a bad organization today?
Yeah, because they don't have a long-term plan. Now, George Payton may have one, and we may see it more, come February of 22. Like, okay, this works.
Yeah.
But it's a bad organization when you have a GM and a head coach that are in totally different spots, right? You got a GM that's in first year of a 6-year deal, head coach who's just hanging on by his fingernails for the job. You got a defense that's built to win now, and you got all this young talent on offense that you want to let marinate and develop. Like, it's not in sync. And it's an organization that came out and said, we got to win in September. We got to save Vic's job. We got to go 8-9, 9-8, play meaningful games in November and December. I think that's the bad objective. I think a great organization looks at it and says, we got to get on a trajectory to a Super Bowl. So if you're plotting the seasons, an 8-9 or 9-8 isn't bad if it's on the way toward 11-6, 12-5, Super Bowl type contending team. It is bad if it's the peak or if it's a plateau. And all they worried about was getting to this plot point, and they didn't think, where's it going? And to me, that's a bad organization. It's much too focused on short term versus long term. I am encouraged by George Payton. I think his draft class was fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's reason to be optimistic on that front. But I think organizationally, they continue to be in this win now mode. And it's like, well, win what? Again, with Teddy Bridgewater, what are you going to win? I think it needs to be, how do you build a championship team? And are you willing to take your lumps along the way? The Houston Astros style, right? Of have one of the worst teams in the history of baseball for 2 or 3 years in a row. And now every year they're winning a World Series, in the World Series, in the postseason. It's having a plan. And at the most important position in sports, they don't have a plan.
I think if I hear you correctly, I think you just want to sign up Fangio and Teddy Bridgewater to 5-year extensions. Is that what you're saying then?
yeah. My worst nightmare is coming to fruition here, Keith.
And we've heard your take on Matt Corral of Ole Miss. I mean, he's a guy that you're pretty high on. You would probably even move up to draft him. Now, let's say that Vic Fangio sort of messes up and ends up winning 9 games and they keep him here and Pat Shurmur stays as well. Do you want Matt Corral here? Do you want Pat Shurmur to get within 100 miles of this guy?
Boy, it's not my ideal scenario, David, by any means. But I still think you need a young quarterback. I would still want Justin Fields here or Mac Jones here, because you have to have that guy that you look at and say, he's going to be our solution for a decade, or has the potential to be the solution. So, yeah, I would still want him here, because I would look at it and say, well, Pat Shurmur's not going to be here in 2023. If they bring any of those guys back, all they're doing is delaying the inevitable. Instead of making the decision now, they're just kicking the can down the road, and going to be kicking themselves that they didn't do it when they should have. Same thing John Elway did with John Fox. He wanted to fire him after Super Bowl 48 and didn't. Wound up getting rid of him a year later. Same thing he did with VJ. Remember when he slept on it after the last game of the year, and then he decided to bring him back, and then they were ready to get rid of him, midway through the next season? It will be the same scenario, but Matt Corral's I think he's an unbelievable talent. I think he's Kyler Murray 2.0. I think he's the prototypical, modern day NFL quarterback, the way he can run around and make plays, the way he can throw the football, off schedule, the way he can move the chains when things, look, Teddy Bridgewater's great when everything's on schedule and you run 12 consecutive plays and march right down the field and don't have a holding penalty and a running back trip over a yard line, whatever, an incompletion that gets tipped or something negative. How do you come back from those? Drew Lock was able to do that, right? He could do those kind of things, just couldn't do them consistently enough. Matt Corral's the kind of guy who can. I think he's a phenomenal talent. The other part of it I like is, man, if you watch him play or you talk to anybody who's been around him, he's got a little bit of that swagger, and sometimes that can make you a jerk, but it also makes you that personality type that is, yelling at your teammates on the sideline, both in a positive and a negative when it's needed. That's part of my issue with Teddy Bridgewater. Like, oh, he's flatline. Well, yeah, we heard the same thing about Joe Flacco, right? Like, oh, he's flatline. Like, that's not the guy I want to get behind. I don't think it's the guy fans want to get behind. I don't think it's the guy teammates really want to get behind. You have to have somebody that's out there that's competing. Why did people love John Elway? Yeah, he's a great quarterback with a big arm and made a bunch of amazing plays, but he also had a ton of heart. Peyton Manning, totally different kind of quarterback, but man, that guy had a ton of heart. Jake Plummer, ton of heart. Why did they hate Kyle Orton and Jay Cutler and to some extent and Trevor Siemian and Joe Flacco? Trevor Siemian, I said smart, but Joe Flacco, They just had no heart at all. I think Matt Corral's a guy that would just be a ton of fun to watch every Sunday, watch him develop. He may even be a guy, David, that Pat Shurmur couldn't even screw up. He may be that good.
So, and Matt Corral's probably going to go top 10. I mean, is what I'm figuring. And me and Matt have talked about this. We figure he's going top 10. The Broncos are probably going to be somewhere between 15 and 18, maybe. I mean, is there somebody else you look at? And if you decide, I want Matt Corral and I'm trading up to get this guy, what are you willing to give up? And who would you want as a coach? Because me and Matt have talked. If you're going to get a guy like this, you need a guy that is going to come in, and is going to use this guy to his full talents. We're thinking like maybe a Joe Brady type or someone like that. I mean, is there somebody else you have an eye on that could be a good head coach to bring in here for one of these young guns?
Yeah, and I haven't necessarily dove into the list all that much. I mean, a year ago, Matt Campbell from Iowa State was kind of my guy. Back when they hired Fangio, it was LaFleur. When they hired VJ, it was Kyle Shanahan. So I haven't necessarily, picked my guy yet for this year, because I don't think they're going to be in the market for one. I think it's going to be Vic Fangio's job, unfortunately. Would I trade up for him? Yeah, I'd rather go 0-5 or it's 0-6 the rest of the way, be 6-11 and not have to trade up for him. I'm a Broncos fan. I know it's bad to say you want them to lose, but wouldn't that be simpler than, hey, you finish 8-9 and have to trade Jerry Jeudy in your number one to get the guy you would have just got if you'd lost the last 6 games? That seems like it makes a lot more sense to me. But I know the Broncos love him. I think the thing they're concerned of, you've got 6 foot 200 pounds listed here. When I talk to people, it's, hey, he's 6'1", $190. That worries us. I get it, but it's not 1992 anymore. The game has changed. The league has changed. The offenses have changed. I think a guy at that size, Kyler Murray is probably right around that stature. So I know the Broncos like him. I know they like the kid from Nevada, Carson Strong. They like the kid from Pitt. I think it's Pickett.
Kenny Pickett.
So, there's some options out there. But I think if you made me bet, like, hey, who's the one guy in this class that is not going to miss, it's Matt Corral.
Absolutely. So in terms of the quarterback class, you mentioned a couple that you've heard the Broncos have an eye on. I have concerns with Pickett, of course, the 1-year production. Every time I bring it up, the Joe Burrow, rise to glory is brought up. Carson Strong, there's concerns about his mobility. We talked about, seeing a quarterback like Teddy, who's not exactly the most mobile, and it is definitely a shortcoming for him. So in this draft, is it essentially going to be Matt Corral or bust?
For me, it probably would be. Yeah, I don't think you just take a quarterback to take a quarterback. I'm kind of in between the Mike Evans theory and the D-Mac theory. Like, D-Mac's just take one. Mm-hmm. And Mike is sit around and wait for the perfect one to come around once every 3 decades, and then you finally hope you're in the right spot for him. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me either. I think if you like a guy, I think you draft him. And then I think the other thing is you got to fail quick. Right? Like, I think the Arizona Cardinals were very smart with, hey, we spent the 10th pick in the draft on Josh Rosen. We're so bad, we're picking number 1 overall. We're taking Kyler Murray the very next year. We don't care that we took a quarterback. Fail fast. Make the decision. So, I do think if it's me, I would probably put him Corral 1, and then it's a significant drop to either Strong or Pickett. I think there's issues. Honestly, there's issues with all of them, but I think the only real issue with Corral is his size. And I'm less concerned with that than I am something like, hey, you've only had 1 year of production, or if it's Carson Strong, hey, what's the level of competition? Some of those kind of things. But, Strong kind of strikes me as and not the same kind of talent, but they said the same thing about Josh Allen. And I always looked at it and I had the same thought with Zach Wilson. I've been in this area forever. Wyoming's never any good. If you lead Wyoming to 10 wins in the Mountain West Conference title game, you must be pretty darn good. BYU hasn't been good since Ty Detmer was there, and Zach Wilson gets them to double-digit wins. Like, all right, that guy must be pretty darn good.
Absolutely.
Can you lift boats? And I think Pitt kind of falls into that category. When's the last time Pitt was, this notable? And I know they're not in the playoff, and they're not probably playing on a January 1. They're not playing in a January 1 bowl game. But man, I've watched more Pitt football this year than I think I have since Tony Dorsett or Dan Marino was there. So, maybe Larry Fitzgerald. So I think there's pluses with all of them, but Corral, I think, is clearly the number 1 guy.
Yeah. There's one more name I want to throw around real quick in the draft, but then I have a question leading towards the veteran side. There's a name he's kind of gone unnoticed. He's out of Wake Forest, Sam Hartman. You talk about putting, schools on the map. Wake Forest has had a fantastic season this year. The kid's a redshirt junior. He hasn't declared that he's going to come out yet, but it's a possibility. Have you heard anything about Sam Hartman?
I haven't from a Broncos standpoint, for good or bad. So I would just put that in a, don't know in terms of kind of their level of interest, or haven't heard anything. I think he falls into that category we were just talking about, because you make a good point. Wake Forest was 10th in the country a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember the last time I saw that in football, maybe in basketball when Tim Duncan was there. But It's just not something you normally see. So if somebody's able to do that, clearly they're doing something. It's a little bit like when Phillip Rivers got NC State to some notoriety, right? Like when was NC State, getting any run in that conference and in that part of the country? And you start to take notice and pay attention of, all right, they must have either a special coach or a special quarterback. I don't know if he's in that category, but I think that's an interesting name. I think that's somebody, if you're looking, hey, I don't want to trade up, I don't even want to use a first rounder on it. I want to maybe take a little bit more of a Drew Lock type gamble in the second day. If he falls, quarterbacks are interesting because there's always tends to be runs, but that might be an interesting name. But is that going to get the fan base excited? Is it going to get the hill filled on training camp? Probably
Exactly.
not.
You know who would? Unfortunately, Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, that place would be it too. It would be like when Peyton Manning was there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sign me up. If it's 2 years, fine. I don't care. I'll deal with the quarterback problem in 2 years, but I would take that guy all day long.
I think I'm the only one here at Rocky Mountain Sports Network that does not want anything to do with Aaron Rodgers. I don't want a 39-year-old quarterback who has a diva attitude like he does, that one day he just walks in and says, you know what, guys, I'm tired. Screw it. I'm out of here.
Well, the diva attitude I can live with. It's and I know it can be annoying at times, but at the end of the day, when you're watching him on a Sunday, if he's wearing your team's uniform, I don't think you're caring how he votes. I don't think you're caring, what his off-season activities are with Jeopardy or anything else. You're just caring that, man, that guy was able to convert on a 3rd and 8 and keep the drive alive, and we went down and scored and won the game. And 39, back when I grew up, 39 was a guy that had been in the booth for 7 years. Nowadays, maybe they're approaching the end. So
yeah.
The diva part of it, I can see the nerves of that, but I think if we knew as much about every single guy as we do about Aaron Rodgers, it'd probably be kind of hard to find guys you want to root for.
Yeah,
so
they'd probably all be
divas.
stuff.
Right. We all are.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, James, I want to make it a lot easier for you. Rather than having to tank, which I was surprised a 40-year season ticket holder was saying, hey, tank for the right quarterback. I want to give you a magic wand, all right? I'm going to give you a magic wand, but it can only grant one of 3 wishes. You get your QB1, you get your coaching staff you want, or you get team ownership ironed out. Which one do you choose, man?
QB1. I think John Fox is a very mediocre head coach, but with Peyton Manning, that guy was great. I think if you correct that, I think you can cover up a lot of sins with the coaching staff. If they are willing to get out of the way, right? John Fox was smart enough to get out of Peyton Manning's way.
Yeah.
I would hope Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur would be smart enough to get out of Aaron Rodgers' way, just to use an example. I think head coach would be 2. I think the ownership questions are vastly overrated. I think Joe Ellis, for the most part, runs that organization in the same way Pat Bowlen did. He's not Pat Bowlen, and he's not, he doesn't have the carte blanche to say we're going to overspend, right? Like he has these fiduciary responsibilities of running the team and all that kind of stuff. But, he was there with Pat Bowlen for 2+ decades, maybe 3. He knows how, Pat wanted to run the organization. And I see it in a lot of the off the field things. So back in the day, way back when I worked there, it wasn't just hey, we want to be number 1 in everything, and it's a neat thing to say. Like that's what they did. Like they spent more money on the team, on the game program than any team in the league. It was something that they lived. And I still have friends that work over there. I'm down there all the time, and it's not an organization that cuts corners on things that bad organizations cut corners on, right? Like the Cardinals for decades and the Bengals for decades, because Joe Ellis still runs things the way Pat Bowlen did. So I think that issue, it'd be nice to get get it resolved. But honestly, I think there's a lot of guys who could come in here, guys or gals as owners, who would be worse than having Joe Ellis run the show.
Fair enough.
Oh yeah. So transitioning towards the GM kind of things, we talked about George Payton. You mentioned Vic Fangio, and you feel that there's a good possibility he may be safe, which I unfortunately agree with. At the same point, we don't know how much getting a QB1 will change that. It mask a lot of things. But looking at it from the GM perspective, do you anticipate that George Paton's going to kind of follow that mold he came from? I mean, we look at the Minnesota Vikings. They tend to go for the veteran quarterback. They rely on the stout run game, and they invest heavily in their defense. Do we envision that's going to be the same mold we see the Denver Broncos, which has kind of been the mold we've been in? Or does George Paton shake it up?
No, I think that's exactly what we should expect. Partially based on, hey, he was there for 14 years.
Yeah.
If you're there somewhere, if you're somewhere that long, you pick up a lot of those habits. They've been successful, right? Like, they don't have a lot of Super Bowls, but they're also a team that's won a lot of games over the course of those years. And he talks like a guy that's how he gauges success, right? We want to play meaningful games in November and December. That sounds about like the Minnesota Vikings for the last decade and a half, right? They don't throw a lot of parades, but they play a lot of meaningful games in November and December. And I think we've seen in his year on the job, trading for Teddy Bridgewater, trying to get Matthew Stafford reportedly, going heavy in the draft and develop, signing guys that were drafted here, Justin Simmons, Cortland Sutton, guys that he didn't pick but were homegrown products. Like, he's already demonstrated that that's the way he's going to want to go. The Vikings were interesting, though. They did spend first-round picks on quarterbacks. They just didn't spend them on the right ones. They spent it on Christian Ponder. I think Teddy was like an early second-round pick.
No, he was round 132.
Yeah, so that would be a first-round pick now, but back then it was either the first or second pick in the second round. They've spent high picks on quarterbacks. So I don't think he's averse to that. Based on who they're going out and scouting, he's certainly not averse to it either. He wants a bunch of frequent flyer miles, wants to put out a smokescreen where they are interested in drafting a quarterback. So I think the only thing that I wouldn't necessarily agree in terms of how you categorize him or characterize him is that he's going to necessarily go veteran quarterback. I think he'd be willing to draft one. I don't think it would make any sense to draft one with Vic Fangio, a guy who's 62, 63 years old. If they don't make the playoffs this year, but they retain him after an 8-9, 9-8, like, why on earth would a young quarterback make sense in 2022 with Vic? But that's the one where I could see him going either way is on the QB issue.
Okay.
All right. Well, here at 4th and 99, we do a weekly NFL Pick'em contest, and I paced myself. Matt and Keith, they've just sprinted out to a huge lead over me, but I'm like the tortoise. I'm pacing myself for a comeback. So on Wednesday night,
keep telling yourself that, David. Keep telling yourself that.
Hey, that Washington game paid off for me, didn't it?
It did.
Yep.
So we picked the Thursday game on Wednesday nights, and being that you're here, we'll also get your opinion on the Broncos Sunday night. But Dallas is going into New Orleans tomorrow night. Dallas has looked a little off kilter since the Broncos game. Who do you pick in that game between Dallas and New Orleans?
I tend to gauge games based on the quarterback and the head coach. So clearly, Dallas has the better quarterback. Clearly, New Orleans has the better head coach. So it's like, it's a toss-up. I think Dallas. both teams need it. That New Orleans has been reeling since Winston got hurt. I think Dallas is the better overall team, so I'll go with the Cowboys tomorrow night, which means lay all your money on the Saints.
Okay. You must pick exactly like me then, James. So
exactly.
I always tell my wife, go opposite of what I'm picking. So Keith, where are you going tomorrow night?
Well, just from a personal standpoint, I like myself some Taysom Hill. And he's getting the start this week. He's going to run on out there. I thought he should have had a little bit better consideration for QB1, and who knows what his future really holds for the Saints. So I'm just pulling all for heart, and I'm saying Saints in this game over the Cowboys. Cowboys have been reeling, and Zeke doesn't look good. I think he's more banged up than most people think.
And Matt, where are you going?
I'm going to go with James on this one. I'm going to go Cowboys. I think they got the better defense. Taysom's first game back. And they got, Randy Gregory. They got Micah Parsons. They got guys that's going to keep Taysom Hill in check on that defense.
How about you, Dave?
And I'm going to go the same. I'm going with Dallas as well. I think Tony Pollard.
All by myself.
I think Pollard can fill in maybe even better than Zeke at times. Zeke just seems to be off. So I'm going to go with Dallas on that. James, do you think Denver can go into Kansas City, and do they have a realistic shot to win this game Sunday night?
No, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to be glued to the TV hoping and rooting. And I've been saying this all week on the air. If they win this game, I'm in. I'm going to stop worrying about, oh, God, if they finish 8-9, 9-8, it's worst case scenario. They'd be better off to lose. If they win this game, I'm on board. I'm in. I said this at 3-0. I said, hey, they got 4 games coming up. If they go 2-2, I'm in. They went 0-4. So I kind of feel like we're going to get the same thing this weekend. I think it was a bit of a mirage on Sunday where, you give up big drives, you get a missed field goal. You give up a big drive, you get a pick in the end zone. Like I think Patrick Mahomes burns you in those situations. So I think the clock strikes midnight for the Broncos on Sunday night, unfortunately. But I will be glued to it, and I will be, on the edge of my seat and screaming at the TV with the rest of us, hoping that I'm wrong.
Do you see any way that Denver can go in there and win this thing?
Actually, I think the game last year out there where Melvin Gordon rushed for, $150, $160, that kind of game where it's, hey, give the ball to Javonte Williams 25 times, keep Patrick Mahomes standing on the sideline, control the clock, try to have long drives that are mostly run-based. I think that's a way. And then the other thing is, and this was the key against the Chargers, they were able to get the pass rush with 4 guys and put 7 guys back in coverage. If they can do that on Sunday night and make Mahomes have to move around and make him uncomfortable while 7 guys are back in Vic's elaborate zone coverages, yeah, they got a shot. But if they don't get to Mahomes with 4 and they have to blitz him, and then you have to go one-on-one with Tyreek or Kelsey or whoever you want to pick on any particular play, I think it's going to be a long night. So those are the 2 keys to me. Run the football, Pat. And then the other one is you got to get that same pass rush from the front 4.
Wait a minute. After Pat Surtain's Champ Bailey performance on Sunday, you wouldn't put him one-on-one with Tyreek Hill? And I just had to throw that out there. I heard you yesterday talking about the interceptions that he had. So
cut the show, Dave. Close it out, Dave. Shush.
I did hear just along what you guys were talking about, though, or what you were talking about, James. Interesting stat. Broncos are number 1 in QB pressures with just rushing 4 in the entire league. 30%. I was pretty shocked by that myself. So.
Well, and that's the Vic Fangio defense, right? When he's got guys that can do that. And look, you know who the most unsung hero against the Chargers was? McTelvin Agim. He was so much better than Shelby Harris has been all season long. Shelby Harris just kind of engages guys at the lines and puts his hands up, tries to knock down the ball. Agim was in the backfield all game long. Draymond Jones played well. I thought it was the best the defensive line had played all year. If they have that kind of performance from those front 4 and Weatherly getting some pressure and kind of mixing it up, that gives them a chance. It really does. If they can't get pressure with 4, it's going to be a long, long night.
So, all right. Well, that wraps it up. We've gone over an hour a little bit. We'll be back Sunday morning, 9:00 for Broncos pregame. So join us on Facebook, YouTube. Make sure you follow, and subscribe to us on there. And we want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to James. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it. It's been fun talking football with you. So we get to hear you all the time on the radio. So it's sort of nice to be able to sit around and talk football with you. And I know Matt and Keith probably appreciate it as well. Anybody follow James Merrilatt on Twitter. He puts some good content out there. Make sure you check out his stuff at 104th, or was it the DenverFanNow.com?
DenverFan.com.
DenverFan.com.
Yeah, my Twitter's a roller coaster, though, just to warn people. It's a roller coaster. But no, I loved coming on. It was a fun discussion. The hour flew by, so appreciate you having me, and would love to do it anytime.
Yeah, thank you very much,
welcome
James.
Anytime.
All right, everybody, you have a great evening. We'll see you Sunday morning.